Traveling the Vortex. Side Trip.
And welcome back to another Traveling the Vortex side trip. I'm Shaun, and if you've been following along, you know that, Star Trek 203 means we will be discussing Star Trek The Next Generation Season 3. If you've not been following along, you're probably a little confused as to why a Doctor Who podcast is releasing a Star Trek episode. Just a brief reintroduction. It was requested that I lend some of my knowledge into the area of Star Trek to our listeners who maybe didn't have such knowledge, and I was happy to do so. It's been kind of a long road coming, and I figured with all of us locked up due to the coronavirus outbreak and pandemic, that now seemed as good a time as any to try and maybe finish off some of these holes in everybody's knowledge. So Season 3 of Next Gen is really where everything clicks. This is where the show becomes Star Trek The Next Generation. This is where it all, it moves at top warp. And when people talk Star Trek, whenever anybody mentions Star Trek The Next Generation, it's from this point forward that they're really discussing the show. A couple of moves happen off-season that put new writers and showrunners in place. These are the people that would continue to guide the show for the most part throughout the rest of the run. Dr. Pulaski is out. Dr. Crusher is back. Gates McFadden returns. And so our cast is back and reunited. And the storytelling marks a almost decidedly different approach from what we've gotten in the first two seasons. Not that what we got previously was bad by any stretch of the imagination, but there seemed to be a little bit more of a focus on putting the characters through some sort of arc by the end of each episode. Now, you have to remember that this is the 90s, and back then, television was not nearly as serialized as it is today. Things were far more episodic. And consequently, with a show like Star Trek, while you could do some things to the characters that would result in a larger lesson to be learned, for the most part, by the end of the episode, your 42-minute runtime, you had to return to the status quo, regardless of whatever problem came up. And that's very formula. Star Trek The Next Generation had a very specific formula for their writing, and generally it was, there is a problem on planet X, it must be solved within time frame Y, or else result Z will happen. And then there was a B plot that would involve two or three characters and what they were going through, and sometimes those two plots would intersect, and one would result in a resolution for the other. And sometimes they would not. But that was kind of the template for most of Next Gen, and they would follow that template very, very closely from this point out. It becomes comfort food. It becomes very reassuring because this positive, hopeful vision of the future falls into a rhythm, and it becomes something that you can expect. Regardless of what they do, in the back of your head, you know that we're going to get back to the status quo, and that everything's going to turn out okay. And that is sometimes the best kind of entertainment, because it's expected, and yet you can still go on this journey and have a lot of fun and have a lot of, that same sense of adventure and experience that your crew members get. So this is where it all really boils down and comes together. And the difficulty is, if I were to follow my previous template of giving you 5 episodes from each season that are kind of your must-watch, well, now I'm starting to get into danger zones, because how could I just pick 5? I could very easily do a top 10 list for this season and still not cover ones that are great episodes. I could do a top 15 and not cover ones that are, ones that I feel are of extreme merit to somebody doing a watch through. But I have endeavored and struggled and, yes, come up with a list of 5. And fandom may or may not agree with me, as always. I invite feedback. If some of your favorites happen to be some of mine, then so be it. And if not, then, it's okay to have different opinions on things. And this is, again, season 3. You got to remember, this is the season where Riker was accused of murder. We had a living spaceship that was trying to commit suicide. We introduced Lieutenant Barclay and his holodeck obsession. We killed all the Hushnik everywhere. We delved a little more deeply into the Romulan threat. The Ferengi returned to much comedic effect. On and on and on. And yet, none of those moments are ones that are in my top 5. So without further ado, number 5 on my list, working, of course, counting down. Number 5 is Sarek. Now, I don't think it was any great surprise to too many people that Next Gen was eventually going to tap into its original series roots. They had done this a little bit in the first couple of seasons by realistically doing sequels to existing Star Trek episodes or bringing back a villain or virus from an original Star Trek episode. This was kind of the first time that we really delved hardcore into that lore and brought a character back, Sarek, Spock's father. And they did something quite daring. And spoilers ahead. And the first time I saw this episode, I was kind of taken aback by it, and angry, and frustrated, and lost, and how dare you. And it wasn't until subsequent rewatches that I realized the A, beauty of the audacity, and B, how extremely well written and well handled this whole thing is. Sarek is suffering from Bendai syndrome, which is a disease that affects Vulcans as they get older, certain among them, and causes the control and the walls of their logic to crumble and allows the emotions to take over, which is a fate worse than death, really, for a Vulcan. But it taps into the idea of kind of almost Alzheimer's or dementia for humans, and which is a terrifying thought. That's kind of number 1 on my list of I don't want that to happen. I mean, I don't wish that upon anybody, obviously, but for me especially, and people always ask, well, how do you want to go out? It's like, there are many, many horrible deaths, but I would gladly take drowning or dying in a fire before I would take sitting in a room losing my mind. I have spent far too long trying to fill it. And admittedly, most of what I filled it with may be somewhat useless pop culture trivia, but I filled it. I'm continually trying to put new things in. And the idea that I could just be stripped of that, it is beyond terrifying to me. So to watch Sarek, this beloved character that we all know, that we all love, go through that is agony upon agony. And he's supposed to be conducting an important negotiation as an ambassador, and Picard offers him the opportunity to mind meld with him, to use his strengths, and basically give him the emotions and the madness so that Sarek conduct the negotiations. And it's a beautiful moment. It is extremely powerful to watch these two commanding performances on screen together. And so Sarek is it's a just a phenomenal episode. And admittedly, it could be argued, I guess, that there's a lot of, fan service here where we're dealing with, oh, look, we brought Sarek back, ha, ha, ha. But no, it goes far beyond that for me. Number 4, Sins of the Father. A very cool Tony Todd shows up as Kern, Worf's brother, and spins a yarn that Worf, son of Moog, has been charged with treason. He's been basically outed as a traitor to the Empire. And the two brothers are now on the outs, and they have to fight to save their family lineage. And what makes this episode great is Ron Moore. Now, Ron Moore is a phenomenal writer. The name should sound familiar if you are a science fiction fan. He is responsible for the revamped, reimagined, rebooted Battlestar Galactica. Before that, he worked on Star Trek. And he is pretty much the resident Klingon-in-chief. He wrote all the really great Klingon episodes of the series. Ron came to the attention of the Next Gen writers through an open script writing process. Next Gen was one of the few shows during and even since, and not many people ever do this, to allow people to submit spec scripts. And he did, and they liked what he wrote, and they wound up hiring him as a writer, and he rose very prominently in the ranks. And eventually, not only was a staff writer and wrote all these great episodes, but later went on to work on Deep Space Nine, and went on to work on Voyager, and had a very long career with Trek. And we're very thankful for that, because Ron Moore rocks. But the other thing that I think really makes this episode great is the ending, which is a bit of a surprise, because as with that edict of you kind of have to return things to the status quo, well, in this one they don't. The episode ends and things happen in such a way that, well, in order for the status quo of the Empire to be maintained, Worf is branded a traitor. He is excommunicated from the Klingon Empire. And he takes that upon himself in order to save Kern and allow his brother to continue to serve and be of some service and not be stripped of his honor. Worf, obviously he's the first Klingon in Starfleet. He's this, he's that, blah, blah, blah. Well, he's kind of already the black sheep of the family. So he's kind of okay with that. Even though nothing about it is right. Nothing about this decision-making, nothing about this process, nothing about this will hold any water or ring any amount of truth. This is what happens. And it's a powerful place to leave Worf, and it's a daring one. It's a very, wow, can't believe he did that. And so, again, this is kind of one that the audacity of it is like, yeah, all right, you get a spot on the list just for that. Number 3 on the list, and I think a lot of people will agree, and I think that, in a way, this could be the whole list. Yesterday's Enterprise. Yesterday's Enterprise is our prerequisite time travel episode for the season, and man, is it a good one. The Enterprise C drifts out of an engagement with they disappear from time, which creates a hole in the universe. And when they appear, the Enterprise D picks them up, and they're battle damaged and scarred, and everybody is in a much darker bridge setting, wearing very more militaristic uniforms and carrying sidearms. And we learned that this engagement, basically 20 years earlier, the Enterprise C was lost with all hands when she defended a Klingon ship from being attacked by Romulans. And it was that action that kind of set the groundwork for the lasting truce that we have with the Klingon Empire today. But because she fell into this time rift, that didn't happen. The Klingons were destroyed. They blamed us because we didn't come to their rescue. And we are now at war with the Klingons. And the only person that knows something's not right, is Guinan. Once again exhibiting her very cool, but we're not going to explain it, powers of observation. That Guinan knows that something is wrong. Tasha Yar is alive and well on the Enterprise D. And so they begin to make all these preparations to, hey, we've got a new ship. She can help in the fight. Yay! And Guinan eventually convinces the powers that be that no, this isn't right. You have to go back. And Tasha, having fallen in love with the dashing first officer, goes with them. Because, again, in Guinan's words, she's not supposed to be here. The ship disappears through the time rift, and suddenly things snap back to the way they're supposed to be. Only this, of course, will set up a huge ripple effect later for many, many, many things. Yesterday's Enterprise is an example of how to do a time travel story right. It is a little bit parallel universe, a little bit time travel, a little bit what if, a little bit, it's got all of the bases covered. And it does them so well that it's just an exceptional watch. Anytime you go back to this one, it's an exceptional watch. Number 2 on my list. Now, this is where I think a lot of fandom's going to go nuts. I think all of them will agree with me that it's a great episode. I doubt any of them will place it as highly on the list as I do. The Most Toys. Kivas Fajo is a collector of rare antiquities. He is wonderfully played by Saul Rubinek, who is an actor of no small note. If you are a science fiction fan at all, you have seen this man guest star on your show at some point in time or another. And he has decided that, he's going to collect something very special, something quite unique. And when Lieutenant Commander Data's shuttle is destroyed in an accident, the crew is left bewildered and confused and bereft. But of course, Data didn't die. Kivas arranged it and snatched him. And you will sit in your chair. The power struggle that is on display here between Data and Kivas, and between these two actors, between Brent Spiner and Saul Rubinek, is really kind of the heart of this episode, as Data exhibits a full range of his logic and how to push things in a very Gandhi-like. It's a very nonviolent protest, and how he is goaded and coerced and pushed into things over and over and over by Kivas Fajo as this episode progresses. And it's interesting to see how the android's resistance cracks, and how he continues to try and come up with new things, only for the end to come along. And the end is one of those absolutely fantastic, brilliant endings that has been debated and discussed and argued about since it aired. And that question is, I don't want to spoil it for you, so if you've seen the episode, obviously you know what I'm talking about. Did what we were implied to, did what we were led to believe happen actually happen? My personal belief is absolutely yes. But it's just an all-around fantastic episode, and a very, very great one for Data's character, and a brilliant performance by Brent Spiner. And Data might be my favorite, so I think maybe that's why I tend to, I don't know if you've noticed, I tend to seems like a little heavier on some Data episodes with this run. And I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that my number one choice of the season is the best of both worlds. Part 1. It's the best of anything ever. It's the best cliffhanger. It's the best season finale. It is the best hour-long segment of television, probably in the history of hour-long segments of television. It's that good. In it, the Borg return. Not because Q is involved, not because we've been blown hundreds of thousands of light years off course. No, it's just they're here. They are invading, and it is up to us to stop them. And we get several very cool, bits, not the least of which, of course, is the music. This is another outstanding score for the series, and one of the first that I purchased on CD as far as an episodic television soundtrack goes. I bought, I owned a Doctor Who one from the Five Doctors. Maybe one other Trek one from, the original series. I don't remember if that came after or not. At any rate, the music in this is just off the hook. It's just the only way I can describe it. And so the Borg invade, and we're introduced to Commander Shelby and the idea of Borg Tactical, and there's just so much rich awesomeness to this. And we get the Battle of Wolf 359 completely off screen. But we see the aftermath of it. We get the Borg's attack on the Enterprise, and it's devastating. We get the kidnapping of Picard, which is shocking. We get the assimilation of Picard, which is even more shocking. We get more words of wisdom from Guinan. We get just so much of this episode works. And then we get the plan. We're going to punch them. We're going to take them out. We've got this. We're going to make this work. And we get the cliffhanger. Mr. Worf, fire. Da-da-da-da, bum, 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 da-da-da. And the words "to be continued" came up on the screen. And there was a collective scream from Star Trek fandom at that point. We could not believe that was the end of this episode. And it hit me and my household harder than just about anybody else. We were not fans of Star Trek The Next Generation when it had started. We were very much old school. My mom was an old school Star Trek fan. I started my Star Trek journey, as I've said, with the animated series. So then along comes this sleek, shiny, what's with all the windows? Just not a fan of this thing. But as the third season progressed, that was when we really kind of started watching it with some amount of regularity. And that was where we fell for it. This is where all the good stuff's happening. This is where the good episodes are. This is where the character development's at. And it's like, man, this is all right. This is pretty. And it very subtly wormed its way into our hearts. Even my mother, by the end of this season, is watching the show with us. So it ends, and she had turned away for just a second. I don't remember why. I think dinner was being prepped. But she turned away. And she heard me down in the family room. No! She, what? I was like, they and of course this is broadcast. This is not, something that you can very easily digitally back up and show her. We weren't taping them yet. So there was a thing, and there was Picard, and he was all Borgified, and it was and they were going to shoot it, and then it came up and said to be continued. She was like, "Oh, really? That's where they left it?" I was like, "Yeah." Oh man. It's like, all right, well, we got to see what's happening. You got to see what happens next week. And a very strange thing happened. They went to a commercial break. They never go to a commercial break. There's always the next time on Star Trek The Next Generation, and you get the teaser. They went to a commercial. And they came back from commercial, and it was credits. And my scream of, "No!" was even more louder and intense than it was the first time around, because I suddenly realized this meant it was a season finale. There was no next time on Star Trek The Next Generation. And we had to wait all summer. It was intolerable. It was like Who Shot JR? It was the sci-fi equivalent of Who Shot JR? It was the wilderness months of Star Trek. Oh, it was agony. And that, my friends, is the sign that you've done something right. When you can hit your audience that hard over the head with an episode and make them burn for 3 months waiting for your return. That's when you've got them. And so season 3 of Next Gen really, really, really is the quintessential, this is what everybody talks about. So, yeah, no surprise there that episode is at the top of my list. I have a couple of honorable mentions. Who Watches the Watchers, I think, is a fascinating moral and ethical episode. The Defector is a great one. Deja Q, where Q loses his powers and is turned human. That one's a lot of fun. The aforementioned Hollow Pursuits, where we are introduced to Lieutenant Barclay, who is not just obsessed with the holodeck. He actually has a compulsion and a complex where he deals better with interacting with holographic characters than he does with real ones, with real people. And what a fascinating idea that is. And what a great turn of events for Dwight Schultz, who, of course, you know as Murdoch from the A-Team. But for him to be able to suddenly turn this one-off, ostensibly guest shot, into a recurring role every year. We would get a Barclay episode, and it was great. I know a lot of people weren't big on Barclay. I loved him. I thought Barclay was a fantastic character. And you want to talk about an arc. Oh, my goodness, the arc that he goes on. And then Menage a Trois, or Menage a Troy, in which the Ferengi kidnap Lwaxana, and we get another delightful performance from Majel Barrett Roddenberry, and another one that I didn't appreciate when I first saw it. It's grown on me, and her portrayal of Lwaxana has certainly grown on me over the years. And again, that just scratches the surface. There's so much good in season 3. But I think that'll wrap it up. This one I'm actually going to run a little bit shorter, which I'm kind of surprised with, but I didn't have to give you as much backstory on it, so that's good. As always, I invite you to check us out over on Traveling the Vortex for all the Doctor Who news that's fit to print. And you can find us at travelingthevortex.com and on Patreon. And we appreciate all of your hard-earned dollars that go into this hard-worked podcast. And we strive to be worthy of your investment. I hope again that you're all taking shelter during this, well, as I record this, during this pandemic. Hopefully at the time that you're listening to this, I wish that all is well and that the all clear has been sounded. And until next short trip for the Trek universe, I leave you as they left us, with a cliffhanger. Mr. Worf, fire.